Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep on something kind of like right out of a spy movie. Air gapping. You know that like super secure way to protect systems?
Right.
By like totally isolating them from the internet, we're going to find out if air gapping is all it's cracked up to be or if it's kind of more fiction than fact. And we're using a paper from Barco, they know control room tech, to uncover the pros and cons and maybe a few surprises along the way. Because, spoiler alert, air gapping might sound like Fort Knox, but it's not always the best way to go.
Yeah, what's really interesting about air gapping is that it's like incredibly simple. You can think of it this way. You have a treasure chest and it's full of like top secret information. Air gapping is basically just like burying that chest deep underground with no digital maps, no access codes, nothing to guide anyone to it. It's total physical isolation
Yeah.
from any unsecured networks, especially the internet.
So no sneaky hackers like tunneling their way in through Wi-Fi.
Exactly. That's a huge advantage, especially when you're dealing with super sensitive data, like in government or military control rooms. The idea is that if a system is physically isolated, it's really, really hard for an attacker to like remotely get in.
But wait a minute, let's say we're talking like a high-stakes military operation where every second counts. If our command center is air-gapped, wouldn't that really limit access to like real-time info? No live CCTV feeds, no web dashboards, no instant updates, just like a bunch of old AV equipment. Seems like that could actually make things worse, like, hinder decision-making when things are really critical.
You've hit on a major limitation of air gapping, operational inefficiency. Imagine trying to coordinate like a super complex operation, but the information is delayed or incomplete. It could mean the difference between success and failure.
Yeah.
And relying on like outdated technology, that can really hurt your responsiveness in situations that are changing quickly.
And don't forget the logistics of maintaining these air-gapped systems. Constant manual updates, patching, no single sign-on. It sounds like a full-time job for a whole team.
Oh yeah, the resource demands are big. It shows how much you need highly skilled people to manage these systems. But maybe even more concerning, air gapping can create a false sense of security.
Wait, what? So just because a system is physically isolated doesn't actually mean it's completely secure?
Not always.
Huh.
While air gapping definitely makes those external attacks a lot harder, it doesn't get rid of all the risk. Think about it.
Yeah.
What if there's like a vulnerability inside the air gapped system itself? Or what if somebody malicious gets access to the network?
That reminds me of that Stuxnet attack, like super sophisticated malware, right? And it got into Iran's nuclear program, even though they had all these air gap measures. It showed everybody that even with physical isolation, attackers can still find ways in.
Yeah, Stuxnet really changed the game. It showed that you need strong security protocols, even in air-gapped environments. Because here's the thing, air gapping can make organizations lazy. They neglect other important security practices.
So it's like you're putting all your eggs in one basket, assuming that physical isolation is all you need. But what about all those modern security tools? The ones that rely on being connected. Things like daily antivirus updates, threat intelligence sharing, or those SIME systems, the ones that analyze data from like a ton of sources to find problems. Those are all off limits with strict air gap, right?
Right. Modern cybersecurity is all about being proactive and detecting threats in real time. Air gapping, just by its nature, makes it really hard to use these powerful tools. It's like trying to go through a minefield without a map or a detector. You might get lucky, but the odds are really against you.
Okay, so air gapping, maybe not exactly the silver bullet it's made out to be, but before we just like throw it out completely, let's talk about some alternatives. I'm really interested in this idea of zero trust security. It seems like a way more modern and adaptable approach compared to the like rigid isolation of air gap.
Yeah, zero trust security. It's a total paradigm shift in how we think about cybersecurity. Imagine this. Instead of assuming everything inside a protected perimeter is safe, zero trust is like never trust, always verify. It assumes that any user, device, or connection could be compromised, and it requires constant authentication and authorization.
So no more just relying on a moat and a drawbridge.
Exactly. Zero trust understands that threats can come from anywhere, from inside or outside an organization. It focuses on verifying identities, minimizing access privileges, and constantly monitoring for suspicious activity. Think of it like a super high security building where every door is locked, and you need like multiple levels of clearance to get into different areas.
And it's not just like some theoretical thing anymore. Some countries are making network connectivity for critical infrastructure, the law.
Right. Germany's IT-SIG 2.0 law is a great example. It requires critical infrastructure operators to implement really strong cybersecurity measures, including being able to detect and respond to attacks immediately. And to do that, you need connectivity. to access threat intelligence, share information, and work together on responses.
So it really seems like the world is moving towards a place where connectivity and security go together. But where does Barco stand on this? They're the ones who wrote our source material. They're the experts in control room technology. So I'm curious to know what they think.
That's interesting. Barco actually knows that air gapping has limitations, especially now that everything is so interconnected. Their philosophy is what they call security by design. Basically, they build security into every single part of their systems from the very beginning. It's not about picking between connectivity or isolation. It's about finding ways to get the best of both.
Ah, so they're not completely ruling out air gapping.
No, not at all. They know that some situations might still need some physical isolation, but they're also really into these smarter, more integrated solutions, ones that use the power of connectivity without sacrificing security. One thing they're looking at is something called integration at the glass.
Integration at the glass sounds pretty futuristic. What does that even mean?
Okay, imagine a control room. It's got two separate systems. One is connected to the outside world, and one is air-gapped for maximum security. Integration at the glass lets these systems work together perfectly, but only at the presentation layer, usually the user screen. So you can see information from both the connected and air-gapped systems, like right next to each other, without actually connecting them physically.
That's really clever. You get all the security benefits of air gapping for that sensitive data. But you also get to see real-time information from the connected world. It's like having your cake and eating it too.
Exactly. It shows how Barco is dedicated to finding innovative solutions, the kind that meet the needs of modern control rooms. And it all goes back to a key insight from their global control room research for 2024. There's a link between how efficient a control room is and how connected it is.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, according to their research, a full 80% of control rooms that said they were efficient, they were also connected to the outside world. And only 48% of the less efficient control rooms were. So you start to see a pattern there.
Wow, that's a big difference. It seems like being connected can actually make you more efficient, which is kind of the opposite of what people usually think.
It reminds us that security and efficiency don't have to be enemies. You can actually have both and create a control room that's strong and responsive. But this brings up a really important question. Is air gapping really a good strategy for the long term? Or are we moving towards a world where the only way to go is sophisticated, connected defenses? To figure that out, we need to really understand how threats are changing and explore what we gain and lose with different security approaches. And that's what we'll be doing in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so let's talk about how threats are changing. It's like playing chess, but the attackers are constantly coming up with new moves, and we have to be like way ahead of them. Air gapping might have worked when things were simpler, but cyber criminals today, they're way more sophisticated, way more persistent.
It's like trying to protect a castle, but the army figured out how to fly over the walls. Your perimeter, it might be strong, but it's not enough anymore. Right. We're seeing more targeted attacks, the kind that exploit weaknesses in systems. In social engineering, that's where they trick employees into giving up information. And advanced persistent threats, those can stay hidden on a network for months.
And those attacks can still be dangerous, even with an air gap. Like if somebody gets malware onto a system that's supposed to be isolated, say with a USB drive, things could go really bad.
Oh, totally. That's why you need layers of security. Even with air gapping, think of it like a defense strategy. You need strong protocols, constant monitoring, and you have to be looking for threats all the time.
Barco seems to agree with that in their paper. They're not saying air gapping is useless, but they're definitely saying we need to think about security in a bigger way.
Right. Their security by design principle for Barco CTRL. That's a perfect example. They build security features into everything, from the hardware to the software to how people use it. It's like building a fortress with tons of defenses instead of just relying on one wall to keep everyone out.
So it's not just about physical isolation. It's about designing and maintaining systems with security in mind from the start. It's like having an alarm system and security cameras on top of a big fence.
Exactly. And Barco is being proactive. They're always doing research and coming up with new security features to deal with new threats. Because in cybersecurity, you can't just sit still.
So what does this mean for organizations that are using air gapping now? Are they in trouble?
Not necessarily. Air gapping can still be useful sometimes, but it's really important to ask yourself if it's the best option for the long term. Organizations need to ask some tough questions.
Like what threats are they most worried about?
Yeah. And is air gapping actually stopping those threats? Or is it just making them feel safe when they're not?
And how much are they willing to give up in terms of efficiency and being connected? to keep that isolation?
Those are all good questions. And remember, technology changes fast. What's safe today might not be tomorrow.
It's like using an old flip phone because you think it's more secure than a smartphone. Sure, it might be harder to hack in some ways, but you're also missing out on a lot of features and ease of use.
That's a great analogy. Air gapping might seem safe, but it can also hold you back. It stops you from adapting to new technologies
Yeah.
and from using innovative solutions.
So what's the bottom line for our listeners?
Air gapping isn't bad in itself, but it's not a magic solution either. It's just one tool. And whether it works depends on a lot of things, like what threats you're facing, your budget, and your long-term goals. The most important thing is to think strategically and find the right balance between security, connectivity, and efficiency.
Barco seems to have found that balance. They're not saying get rid of air gapping completely, but they are doing new things by combining physical isolation with these sophisticated connected defenses.
Yeah, and their integration at the glass idea. That's a great example of this new way of thinking. They're figuring out how to connect isolated systems to the connected world, so users can see information from both without compromising security.
It's almost like a hybrid approach, taking the best of both worlds, and it makes a lot of sense these days. But this brings us to a bigger question. What's next for cybersecurity? Is air gapping going to disappear, or will it stick around alongside these newer approaches?
That's the big question, and it's something we'll talk about as we finish up this deep dive. But before we do, I want to say one thing. Security isn't something you do once and then you're done. It's something you have to keep working at. You have to be careful, adapt, and be ready to use new technologies and strategies.
So we've talked about air gapping, the good and the bad, and how it struggles with modern threats. And we've looked at other approaches like zero trust security. But the question is still out there. What's the future of cybersecurity? Is air gapping going to be like a museum piece? Or will it still be important for protecting those really sensitive systems?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people are talking about. Some experts think air gapping is becoming obsolete
Yeah.
because the threats are so advanced now. And you need connectivity to really defend yourself. They say relying on physical isolation just won't work in the long run.
Especially with how fast technology changes. What seems impossible to hack today might be easy tomorrow.
Exactly. And there are more and more things to attack now. We're connecting everything. Industrial systems, home appliances, everything. And every new connection is a potential weakness. Trying to air gap everything is like trying to stop a flood.
So it seems like things are moving away from isolation and towards security that's more adaptable.
Definitely. Zero trust security is a great example. Instead of just having a perimeter, it's about verifying who you are and constantly watching for threats, no matter where they come from. It's more proactive and flexible. It fits with how threats are working today.
And Barco seems to be moving in that direction too. Their security by design idea and their integration at the glass thing both show they're looking for solutions that balance security with the need to be connected.
Right. They get that you can't have security if it means you can't do anything, or you can't keep up with changes. Organizations need to be able to work and adapt. And that means being connected, but also controlling the risks.
It's like finding that middle ground between hiding in a bunker and letting anyone walk in. You need defenses, but you also need to be able to interact with the world.
Exactly. And that's the hard part for cybersecurity people now. We need to create strategies that are both strong and flexible, that can stop the threats we know about, but also be ready for new ones.
So it sounds like the future of cybersecurity is all about balance. Security and connectivity, no more easy answers, just constant change and adaptation.
That's right. And that brings us back to our original question. Is air gapping something you can really rely on in the long term? Well, after everything we've talked about, I think the answer is it depends.
Yeah, it depends on the threats you're facing, how sensitive your data is, your budget, and your goals.
Yep.
There's no single solution that works for everyone.
And remember, security is a journey, not a destination. What's safe today might not be tomorrow. We have to stay informed, be proactive, and always question what we think is true.
It's like staying in shape. You can't just work out once and be done. You have to make it a habit.
Exactly. And in cybersecurity, that means knowing what the latest threats are, using best practices, and always pushing ourselves to think differently.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into air gapping, here's what we want you to remember. Air gapping can be useful, but it's not perfect. Connectivity is more and more important for good security, and the future of cybersecurity is about getting the right mix. Security, functionality, and efficiency.
We hope this deep dive has helped you understand cybersecurity better. It's a complex and constantly changing world. Keep exploring these topics. Keep asking questions. Keep challenging the way things are. because the best defense is one that's informed and proactive.
That's all for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into air gapping. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.